I'm pleased to welcome you to the last forum in the For the Love of Creation Fall Online Forum. Tonight's theme is Climate Action Now. My name is Shannon Neufeld, and I'm the Network and Member Relations Coordinator at Kairos Canada, one of the endorsers of For the Love of Creation. Please note that we have simultaneous translation for tonight's event, and this session will be recorded to maintain. The chat function will also be disabled during portions of tonight's event to keep us focused on the program. Before we proceed any further, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. It's wonderful to see all of those different territories acknowledged in the chat. Each of us in the country we call Canada is living and meeting on land that has been inhabited and cared for by Indigenous peoples for time immemorial. I want to acknowledge that I am on the territory of the Huron-Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit Indigenous peoples. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands and resources around the Great Lakes. We name these people groups, territories, and treaties as a small step to acknowledging the harms of colonization and our commitment to reconciliation and right relationships. I'd now like to invite Sister Margot Ritchie of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Canada to open us in prayer. Sister Margot is a Sister of St. Joseph in congregational leadership. She has been a longtime Kairos supporter and someone who is very appreciative of the collective commitments we are all making. Thank you for being here with us tonight, Sister Margot.
Thanks, Shannon. So Beth, I think you're going to put, yeah, she is. Well, let's all just take a breath. Probably we've been on about 6 other Zoom calls today or doing a number of things. So I think for simplicity's sake, I'll just be the one leading the prayer, and perhaps we could just breathe it in as we're praying together. Holy One, you created the world with your dream of what it could be. You dreamed of people and plants, animals and air, all living in right relationship with you and with each other. Help us to listen to your voice, your word, and your creation. Let the fullness of your dream become the fullness of our dream. Enliven us together to make choices that embody the truth that we are one living body. Help us make visible that we are together one vibrating web of life. For this, we need humility and courage, clear-sightedness and precision, collective will and personal awakening. Let us experience the sturdiness of our collective action and the joy of this common dream. May the lives of future generations inspire us. May deep keep calling on deep. Amen. May it be so.
Amen. Merci, Sœur Margot. Bonsoir tout le monde. Je m'appelle Beth Lormer et je suis la coordinatrice du programme de justice écologique à Kairos Canada. Je suis aussi membre du comité de coordination pour l'amour de la création. Si c'est votre premier forum ce soir-ci, je vais prendre un moment pour vous présenter Pour l'amour de la création. Pour l'amour de la création est une initiative nationale pour la justice climatique qui unit les communautés de foi et les organisations confessionnelles au Canada. En tant que croyants, nous espérons apporter une contribution significative pour faire face à la crise climatique au cours de la prochaine décennie. Nous cherchons à travailler ensemble d'une manière fondée sur la foi et la théologie, qui reconnaît l'autodétermination autochtone et qui écoute, s'associe avec et amplifie la voix des jeunes. À date, plus de 30 organisations de soutien et de nombreuses autres nous accompagnent dans ce travail. Nous sommes toujours ouverts à l'engagement et à la participation des autres. Pour en savoir plus, veuillez visiter notre site web pour l'amour de la création.ca. Merci pour votre participation ce soir et à ce mouvement. Over the last month, we have gathered every Monday evening to explore a theme related to climate change and the ecological crisis we face. We learned how to connect with people and communicate effectively on climate change. We learned about the policies that will help Canada reach net zero while upholding Indigenous rights and supporting mitigation and adaptation in the Global South. We explored feelings of ecological grief and learned ways to process these feelings and support one another in community. And we engaged in theological reflection of creation care. Whether you have joined us every week this month or are just joining for the first time tonight, we hope this series has allowed you or allows you to learn something new, gain fresh perspective, feel supported by other people of faith, and feel more confident in taking actions that support the climate and a sustainable future for all. Tonight, we are going to take collective action together in breakout rooms. And to help energize and motivate us for these actions, we are first going to hear from two climate activists who will share their motivations and experience with us. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ella Young. Ella is an English-Canadian youth climate activist who works with Fridays for Future Toronto and Climate Strike Canada. She organizes the Global Climate Strike in Toronto and works with fellow activists and national politicians to make a safe and sustainable future accessible for all. Thank you for joining us, Ella. Sure. Oh. We seem to have, Ella, are you there?
I can see her, but she is not able to unmute herself.
Oh,
There.
Okay.
there we go. Sorry about that, Ella.
Yeah, but I realized you were sharing your screen, so that might not actually work.
All right, are you with us now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, great.
Beautiful. Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. So I'm basically here to tell you a little bit about my personal experience in the climate movement as a youth activist, my motivation, some things that help me keep going in these weird, unprecedented times. And then I think I'm gonna do something else, but I will let Beth announce that later on because this is not my webinar. So I originally started in the climate movement about 1.5 years ago. Oh, there we go. Look at that. That's fun. When I read an article on Earth Day in my biology class saying that we had until 2030 to reduce carbon emissions by 50%, or we were going to set off an irreversible set of chain reactions, which basically was going to make our planet uninhabitable at the time. And I just had this weird moment. A lot of climate activists I know have a moment they knew they had to take action, the moment they knew they had to do something. And for me, that was it. That was my moment I knew, because I just had all of these things that came before my head that my parents and my grandparents and my friends and my family had told me about, that, you know, you're going to go and you're going to get your dream job, and you're going to have a family. Oh, you can't hear me. That's not good. Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay, cool. Sorry about that. Internet is glitchy sometimes. I'm just sort of realizing that I wasn't gonna be able to live to see my grandchildren. I wasn't gonna be able to live to even see my children or live to see all these things I was so excited about in my life. So that's what really drove me to originally start in the movement. I got involved met some beautiful, amazing, lovely souls. And I sort of just realized that there is so much doom, there is so much negativity around the climate movement. A lot of people look at it and they think, oh, well, we're screwed anyways. What's the point in me helping? But we have this time, we have the resources, we have everything that we are capable. Like, we have everything that we need. We are entirely capable of making this change and saving our planet and saving our home and pushing forward to have a better, brighter future. We have everything at our hands. It's just a matter, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat. It's just a matter as if we have, you know, the motivation. So I think that's what really keeps me going, is the fact that I have the motivation, I have the people pushing me forward, and I'm not only fighting for my own future, I'm fighting for all of your futures, I'm fighting for the future generations to come, I'm fighting for everyone else.
Thank you, Ella. That was beautiful, and we really appreciate hearing from you. We wanted to invite Ella, as someone who organizes climate strikes, to perhaps energize us with a few climate strike chants. We're not sure how this will necessarily work, but she's going to lead us through 3 of them in English. I'm going to put up a slide, which I think you just saw a moment ago, that has 3 alternative chants in French. So if you are a French speaker, I invite you to say those as Ella is using the English ones, as they don't often translate all that well. So we wanted to make sure that everyone had a chant that they could say and feel energized by. And so I'll put up that slide now. And where are we? Can we see the slide? Okay, great. Okay, so Ella, I don't know how you want to lead us, but
I'm going to be
feel comfortable maybe standing up, and if they feel like that helps them feel energized. And then if you want to just tell us how you would lead someone in a climate strike with these chants, lead us away.
Yeah, this is my first time leading chants online. When I do this, it's usually when we've mobilized the city to shut down a street for climate strikes or something like that. Are people able to unmute themselves, or am I just going to be talking to myself?
People can unmute themselves. The co-hosts will be able to unmute themselves.
I have enabled it so everyone can unmute themselves. What does happen on Zoom though is that when everybody yells at the same time, it sounds really funny. We could try it. We could try it, but it's gonna sound crazy.
That might be a problem. We'll try it and we'll see what happens then. I've never done this before.
It doesn't sync up very well.
No.
That's okay.
That's no good.
So, perhaps people could just use their mouths to mouth the words, or you can be saying them on mute in your homes.
Okay, sounds good.
If you do need to call and response, Ella, I can be your responder.
Okay, great. Do you want to be, so 2 of them are for call and response? I thought that would be easier, but then my brain, for some reason, did not associate that might not work with Zoom. So do you want to be my responder for the first and the second one? Or the first and third one, rather. And then the second one we can all do together. I'll just say it, and then everyone else can like say it to themselves. It'll be super fun.
Okay, great.
All right, sounds good. So the first one, as you can see here, it says, when Mother Earth is under attack, what do we do? And then
Unite, fight back.
When our future is under attack, what do we do?
Unite, fight back.
Unite, fight back.
Okay, so we're gonna try it 2 more times because I like to do them in rounds of 3. All right. When Mother Earth is under attack, what do we do?
Unite, fight back.
When our future is under attack, what do we do?
Unite,
fight back.
Unite,
all right.
Fight back.
Yeah. So good. One more time. When Mother Earth is under attack, what do we do?
Unite, fight back.
When our future is under attack, what do we do?
Unite,
fight back.
Amazing. All right. So I'm gonna do this second one by myself. Well, with you all, but I'm gonna be the only one who's unmuted. Just so everything doesn't go crazy. Okay. So this is one of my favorite ones I like to do at Climate Strikes. It really hypes people up. Sometimes they say the actual word instead of clapping. I'm going to clap because I don't know who's on this call, but if you want to say the actual word in the safety of your home, go for it. All right, so it goes, Wall Street, Bay Street, listen, listen up. The planet is dying, so start to give a. Nice. Wall Street, Bay Street, listen, listen up. The planet is dying, so start to give a. Wall Street, Bay Street, listen, listen up. The planet is dying, so start to give a. Amazing. Okay, so we have one more. If one person or maybe two people want to do the response, because it is a call and response, it's just I think if a lot of people do it, it's gonna be a little chaotic. All right, so this one, when I'm gonna say, what do we want? And then you're gonna reply, climate justice. And then I'm gonna say, when do we want it? We're gonna say now. Don't want it tomorrow. Don't want it the day after. We want it now. All right, so what do we want?
Climate justice.
When do we want
Climate
it?
justice.
Now.
What do we want?
Now.
Climate
Climate justice.
When do we want it?
now.
What do we want?
Now.
Climate justice.
Climate justice.
When do we want it?
Now.
Now.
Yay.
Yay. That's great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Ella. That was great. And I hope everyone else is feeling energized by those. We've shared a few, a video from the Climate Strike youth in Kingston who have put together a series of those chants. If you want to learn more for your own organizing, we welcome you to look at that. Great. So I am now going to pass things over to Joy Kennedy. She's going to share a few words with us. Joy is a consultant on ecological justice issues, a former staff person of the United Church of Canada, the Anglican Church of Canada, Kairos Canada, and the Canadian Council of Churches. She concentrates on the moral and spiritual nature of global challenges and solutions to the economic and ecological threats that the Earth community faces. She is an active participant in the Canadian Interfaith Conversation and convener of the Canadian Interfaith Fast for the Climate. She is the moderator of the World Council of Churches Working Group on Climate Change, with whom and within an Interfaith Liaison Committee, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, effective to the negotiations and ongoing work for climate justice. On the board of directors as treasurer of the Climate Action Network Canada for many years and is the current chair. Thank you, Joy, for being with us. Really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Beth. I'd first like to say that I acknowledge that I'm also here on the territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe, more recently in New Credit. I live on the west bank of the Humber, so the Seneca are very much a part of the hereditary territory here, and on the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Covenant. I'd also like to acknowledge with humility my thanks to Ella, who has led us in this vibrant response to what we need to be about, and that is calling for climate justice. So I acknowledge all of the young people who have taken to the streets, who have been in the negotiating rooms, and who are calling out across the world for climate justice now. Thank you, Ella, for bringing this to us. I want to use a bit of a PowerPoint to kind of keep me on track. There we are. Can you see it now? I'm not sure because my screen is shared, so I can't really see.
We can't see it, sorry.
Can you see it, Beth?
No, we can't.
Okay, I thought I hit the screen share, but I may not have. Do I have to hit something else? Oh, I have to hit that green button.
Yeah.
You have to know I'm not the most savvy in my 72 years, I'm learning new things all the time. So here we go. I hope it works.
Yes, it's
You can see
working.
this now. I want it to go right to there. Is that good?
Perfect.
Okay, good. Whew. So I'm calling it all hands on deck in a climate crisis for the love of creation. So I asked in my prayer time, I asked for a scriptural passage, as I always do. And what kept coming over and over and over was the passage in Mark. That's not Matthew. It's supposed to be Mark. I miswrote that. And Luke, about Jesus calming the storm. So here they are. They're out in a huge storm. All these guys in a boat. They're out in a huge storm and they're panicking. They don't know what to do. And of course, Jesus is asleep in the stern. He's just sleeping through it, And they're going, come on, if you were here, we could do something about this. And they wake him up and he says, come on, where's your faith, you guys? Where is it? I kind of think we're at that moment. We are in a big storm. And we're kind of running around trying to find out how we're going to deal with this storm. How are we going to survive? Where's the panic here? And Jesus kind of says, well, where's your faith? So I wanted to start with that and say that we really need to be thinking about, in this love for creation, faith, hope, and love. And what do those actually mean to us now in 2020? Well, faith. Of course, here are these guys in a boat and they're panicking. They're not faithful. They're going to make it. So what does faith require? Well, it requires a practice, a method, and a discipline. And what about hope? Did they hope to survive? Do we hope to survive? Well, that requires a goal and an ambition. And of course, love. Well, love, it's a verb. It requires a plan and implementation. And we know the greatest of these is love, right? So what do we do? So I want to say that faith communities have been very engaged for decades, for over 3 decades, maybe 4, in continuing calling for climate justice, eco-justice and climate justice. These are just a couple of pictures of churches supporting climate justice in marches in New York and in Toronto. And, we've been there. We have been. We've been a little surrounded by other voices that were louder in many cases. So my context will be the most recent engagement publicly, and that's been at the COP in Madrid last year, where those of us that are there have to be accredited by various organizations. The first thing I want to acknowledge is at the beginning of that, we were in the streets. The whole thing started with 500,000 people in downtown Madrid, thousands in Santiago, Chile, joining us. The people. It started with the people who demand governments listen to growing concern for climate justice, because we know it's now an ethical and moral issue for survival. Quite simply. And faith communities were right there in the midst of it, demanding act now for climate justice. So the theme of COP25 in Madrid, which was supposed to be in Chile, Santiago, but got moved for political reasons to Madrid, the theme was Time for Climate Action. That was the official UN title, Time for Climate Action. But would it deliver? Church people were there saying God saw everything God had made, and indeed it was very good. We have to start from that premise that creation is very good, and we're part of creation. We are a species as part of the multitude species in creation, and it's very good. And climate justice can't wait. We have to act now and support that. So one of the things that's really important for particularly Christians, particularly North American Christians, maybe even Canadian Christians, is that there's no time or room here for spiritual arrogance. So Archbishop Fred Hiltz of the Anglicans said in a film about the doctrine of discovery, stolen lands, strong hearts, that there is no time for spiritual arrogance. We have to admit that we have been guilty of it. We need to come to terms with that. And this holds true for Indigenous cosmovisions, for other faiths, for spiritual traditions and other cultures, agnostics, atheists, those of no faith, for environmentalists and youth. We have no room for spiritual arrogance. What we need to cultivate is humility, compassion, and care. To listen, share, and understand, and act together for the common good and for the healing of the world. So at this particular COP, as we have done in many other COPs, faith communities came together to demand climate justice. We created an interfaith declaration on climate change for this COP because the urgency to act now is for climate justice. And there you can see people from, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Baha'i, Brahma Kumaris, a whole range of faith communities on the planet. And what we called for together was that the Paris Agreement, regarding that, parties have to deliver. They've agreed to it, they promised it, and now they have to deliver. We need to act now. There are no excuses for inaction. We know it. Youth demands intergenerational justice. We demand just economic transitions. We know we need to move through a metanoia, a change. But climate justice must also include social justice. Absolutely no question. Our common home, Mother Earth, is under a threat, and our faith demands us to speak and act. The voices of transformation need to be heard. There's no time to wait, but we do have hope. So we had, daily ecumenical strategy sessions, looking for collaboration and consensus, critical to work toward consensus. It's difficult depending where you're from and what your background is, what your biases are, but you've got to work forward to consensus as the world is trying to do. Now, there was a big Canadian contingent there, as you might expect, but it met daily, and it often met with Canadian negotiators. There were 250 Canadians on the ground, but this is important because they were representatives from Indigenous communities, youth, labor, faith, health, academia, environment, industry, and more. And this large, diverse, and active Canadian civil society delegation, it expects Canada to be a leader in this international forum by negotiating strong outcomes and announcing its own intent to develop a strengthened, nationally determined contribution, which should be ready by the end of this year or early next year. And there we were, the Canadians. My goodness, to get us all in one frame was kind of fun. But more specifically, we're asking our government and all governments for ambition to strengthen our pledges and a faster timeline, for a just transition, realizing that there's going to be pain along the way. So there needs to be creation of decent jobs and economic diversification. To support human rights, including gender and Indigenous rights. Now, Article 6 is a bit difficult for people, but it's about carbon markets, so we want to ensure transparency and accountability. Climate finance, what's our fair share in this whole shift? And of course, thinking about those who are already being impacted by climate change, finance for loss and damage for vulnerable developing countries. So the Canadian delegation, or the CANDEL, our demands to the government were, first of all, listen to the climate scientists, so ramp up in line with the IPCC reports around limiting to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Create mechanisms like legislation to keep a government accountable and on track. Ensure a just transition for workers and collaborate with communities. Redirect investment away from fossil fuels toward clean energy, and therefore get rid of those fossil fuel subsidies and stop the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure. And finally, fully implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, especially respecting free, prior, and informed consent. We were very clear about that and continue to be so. We created an infographic about what would Canada's fair share look like. I'd like you to, that's available on the Climate Action Network website. You can get a lot more detail on that. But we really had experts crunch the numbers and what would it look like if Canada actually did its fair share toward the target. So to deliver it, Canada would have to reduce its emissions by 140% before those levels by 2030. Now, 60% of that would have to happen at home. 80% of this would happen internationally through things like climate finance and bilateral arrangements. But these numbers were developed in light of science, but also in light of equity. That is, what is our historic overall responsibility for the problem and our financial capacity to address it? Now, we weren't just talking to ourselves, we were talking to our minister, this was his first day on the job, I think, Jonathan Wilkinson. He arrived freshly minted, and we attacked him first day, of course. But anyway, he had to make the speech. And we were quite, ho-hum with his speech, but we needed to continue to negotiate with him. And so we were saying, what does climate justice look like? So inside the COP, we did a number of things, and we showed the discrepancy between, I don't know if you can see it, mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, and what kind of support was being given to mitigating, that is, lowering emissions and dealing with the actual, what's going up, adaptation to what's coming down. And so mitigation got most of the money, adaptation got pretty, maybe a third. Loss and damage of what was actually happening on the front lines got zero. So we did a demonstration to exhibit that, to say what's fair, what is not fair. We also were able to hold ecumenical panels on gender with the UN. This is the guy from the UN, and we, Latin America, indigenous peoples, me, an American theologian, talking about gender impacts of climate change and how that needs to be addressed. But also one of our members over here, James Bagwan, he's the Secretary General of the Pacific Conference of Churches, talking about the reality in the Pacific. And these are former leaders of Kiribati and Tuvalu, and Kathy Jenner from the Marshall Islands, talking about what's on the ground, what's actually happening, and why we have no time to waste. Outside the COP, we had people from Latin America who were very disappointed that it wasn't happening in Chile, but that it had been moved to Madrid and Santiago. So you had cross-Atlantic solidarity develop, which was incredibly important. Now, of course, we also had who I call the prophet Greta. She is a prophet, I'm convinced. From Fridays for Future. And in her speech, she accused leaders of creative PR, public relations. And I'm sorry to say that for the most part, she was right. She takes great risks in that, but she was right. There were youth outside, though, or inside the COP. The Lutheran World Federation decided all their delegates would be youth. And so they were inside saying the same thing in very powerful voices. Now, the important thing is that climate change is not a standalone issue. It's really important to link climate change to the other 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them. And that's quite clear that, the interconnectedness of our issues, the interconnectedness of us with all species on this planet, and with the survival of this planet, they have to be dealt with together. And that's a big challenge, but it's also necessary. Now, one group who've identified that they are a locus for this to happen, the integration of it, is United Nations Environment Program, who've created Faith for Earth. Now, Faith for Earth is a a departure from some of the ways that faith communities have often been treated as a kind of a satellite, an add-on. But Faith for Earth has been brought inside the United Nations Environment Program with three main objectives. First, to strengthen partnerships with faith-based organization leaders to boost environmental friendly policies, to promote green faith-based organizations' investments, operations, and assets, and to establish an accessible, knowledge-based support system for faith-based organizations. These objectives support and seek to catalyze the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And as they say, we work with faith-based organizations at all levels to strengthen interfaith partnerships. In my group, the World Council of Churches unit on economic and environment justice is very involved with this particular program. So what can, they ask, and this is their website, unenvironment.org, what can faith organizations do that others can't? Well, they said, and this is right from their website, unparalleled reach and mobilizing because of the sheer numbers of their adherents in every corner of the world, even in remote areas where the fight against environmental degradation will be won or lost, and that's clear. Faith-based organizations have enormous potential to influence policy and tip the scales on the massive global movement we all know is needed to address the planet's environmental challenges. A comparative advantage in addressing the cultural dimension of sustainable development by tapping into people's spiritual side and highlighting that faith and science can be mutually supportive when addressing environmental issues. Now, we all know that religion often dictates what we eat, what we drink, and our attitude towards natural resources. You may or may not know that I've been one of the conveners of Fast for the Climate, where we identify that some of our spiritual disciplines and traditions, like fasting and praying, actually have a lot to do with what we think about our natural resources. So there you go. That's what the United Nations thinks of us. They ask, can institutions of the world's religions make a difference? Certainly. The root cause of our environmental issues is our attitude towards natural resources. Policies and agreements will help, but it's our daily environmental behavior that affects consumption patterns. Now, this shocked me. There are an estimated 37 million churches, 3.6 million mosques, 20,000 synagogues, and countless other temples and houses of worship dotted around the world. That's huge. These institutions hold enormous assets which can make a huge difference if channeled for positive impact. They're also beacons to guide followers seeking spiritual redemption and inspired actions. Now, COVID-19 has made us more aware of our global interconnectedness in the whole web of life, and of our responsibility to uphold God's good creation. So back at the COP, the last day of COP25, we decided, what have we got in our spiritual armory that we can bring forward? And we thought, we can have a vigil. And so we did. We had a vigil. And we read from the World Council of Churches General Secretary's letter, his pastoral letter, that this situation can no longer be considered from afar. In fact, our futures, the well-being of our common home, and the very existence of our species is at risk. The call to our churches and ourselves couldn't be clearer. Our unity, solidarity, and determination have never been more needed by the world. In this context, I write, to urge your creative action. I would ask you all for that too, your creative action, your advocacy, and your prayer before prayer becomes our only recourse. It's almost too late, but we can still make a difference if we act now. We prayed, we fasted, we prayed again, we called out to the delegates and said, act now. And then we encircled the COP and held it in our prayer with blessing and hope. Now, back to Canada. So CANRAC, the Climate Action Network, which you heard I'm the chair of, came home. We're 122 member organizations. And we came back and said, what do we need to do? So what we do is we network and cooperate, bring people together for common goals, but we include environmental NGOs, trade unions, First Nations, social justice, development groups, health and youth organizations, faith groups, and local grassroots initiatives. Our work falls under 3 pillars: nurturing and providing services, policy development and advocacy, building and maintaining Canada's civil society capacity to engage in the international sphere of climate action. So one of the first things we did in March was we brought together people from every political party in Canada, including MPs and senators, who co-sponsored the launch of a Green New Deal with us in Ottawa. This was unprecedented, and we hope to be able to build on that. And then we went home and went to lockdown as COVID hit. So what did we do? We brought together people from the entire range of civil society in Canada to create 6 principles for a just recovery, and I hope you all know about them. Some of you on this call were part of creating these, and it was an incredible experience, bringing together people from every sector you can imagine to create 6 principles for a just recovery. And so I hope you have checked in on justrecoveryforall.ca. But this was an enormous undertaking and so gracious. Everyone was so gracious. So there we are. We know if we're going to get through COVID, we have to have just recovery for all. So our current priorities with CANRAC are the new Canadian Climate Accountability Act, which you've been hearing lots about, just transition, which is about workers and communities, elimination of fossil fuel subsidies, strengthening our own nationally determined contribution, which we hope to hear about very soon, international solidarity through action and finance, and of course, just recovery for all. So what's next? Well, I believe that only through love, through deep, passionate, abiding love, will our faith be strong enough to withstand the rough waters and winds we're now facing. And my hope is that we will explore where is faith, where is hope, where is love, because now we need all hands on deck. The question is, what will you and your community do? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy, for sharing openly with us tonight and for your leadership in this movement. It's so wonderful to hear you connect your experiences as a Christian and an activist climate change, and it was wonderful to hear from you.